lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. Om, peace, peace, peace. Welcome you all to this seminar today, and we have very distinguished panelists, professors, academicians, monks, and those who work in the pursuit of knowledge. So, and we all are seekers of knowledge. So it will be a very interesting seminar with interactive session between the speakers and the audience. So I welcome you all to today's seminar, which have been a very big participant this time. We never had, I don't remember to have such a big participant, and for that I'm very, very happy. And I welcome you all, and especially the audience and the speakers, august speakers. Thank you and welcome you all.
Good morning. Let me add my own words of welcome to those of Swami Kripamanandaji. The main goal of the Vedanta Society of Toronto is to stimulate and support the spiritual growth and evolution of each individual. In the light of Swami Vivekananda's teachings, this can happen through work, worship, study, meditation, and many other methods besides. Most of the activities of the Vedanta Society of Toronto are planned along one of these lines. In this context, the annual seminar that we hold in September is to emphasize the aspect of study and reflection. It's essential in this event that everyone participates by joining in the process of reflection on the theme. Now, the topic for this year is purpose, structure, and meaning. And the kind of questions that we would like to explore are, roughly we've formulated 5 questions. First two, is the structure and order that is observed in nature an accident? Or is the structure and order that we perceive an illusion? Scientists, poets, artists, philosophers, spiritual seekers have remarked on the amazing order in the universe. Whether it be the petals of a flower, the shape of a snowflake, the motion of planets around the sun, there seems to be an order in our universe. This order can be studied, and it can be used to formulate laws of nature. And we can use those laws to make accurate predictions. And this is at the foundation of much of our knowledge of the universe that we live in. Experience has taught us that even when things appear chaotic and unstructured, there may be hidden structure and order. In trying to make sense of the world around us and of ourselves, and to understand both, we have a tendency to search for structure that will bring order in the midst of apparent chaos. The question is, where does this order come from? Why is it there? Or is it there? Is it an illusion? Is it something that we are superimposing? Is the order we perceive an accident? If it is an illusion or an accident, why are we able to make predictions using that structure? If it is real, on the other hand, then why is our knowledge always incomplete? Do these questions have answers? Do the questions even make sense? From here we go to, does the world we live in have purpose or meaning? From order and structure to purpose and meaning. purpose and meaning is related to order and structure. If there is order and structure, does existence suggest an underlying purpose or meaning? That is, the existence of order, does it suggest there is some purpose behind it? Is there a cosmic design? And so far we've been expressing these questions in terms of observing nature, external nature. But there is physical nature and there is the living world. What about life? Does life have purpose, structure, meaning? Does life exhibit the same structure that we see in physical nature? And what about the observer? We are an important part of this whole phenomenon. Does our life have purpose and meaning? Now we are squarely in the realm of philosophy, and we have to think of subjects like free will and destiny. We have to think about the entire process of knowledge and the relative roles of the objective and the subjective aspects of perception. Are the laws that we think that we have discovered, even in the external world, in the physical universe, just mental associations? Is everything governed by cause and effect? What's the limit of causation? And going even beyond philosophy to the realm of spirituality and religion, what is our ultimate goal? Do we have one? And finally, bringing ourselves back from way beyond the clouds in terms of these very difficult general questions, bringing ourselves back to the reality on the ground. If life has purpose, structure, and meaning, what are the consequences for our spiritual life and for our social and interpersonal behavior? These are difficult questions, and we can continue to ask infinitely many more difficult questions. But the tradition of Vedanta is that questions are not really answered or even addressed until we relate the theory to our daily life and the world we live in. So what is the consequence of all this discussion for our spiritual life, for our search for personal fulfillment, and for the way we interact with each other? So that sort of sets the context of what we're discussing. Clearly it's a big, big subject. The goal is not to answer all these questions in a day, but to have a fruitful reflection, study, and discussion. I'm sure we can expect a very interesting day with lots of insights and different perspectives from our learned speakers. But most importantly, I want to ask all of you to open your mind, be prepared to participate, learn from the insights that you hear, but also be prepared to share your own insights. So with those words, then I'll ask Chandra to open and begin the discussion. So I'm being signaled here to just remind everybody, but I think Chandra will do this. As the usual housekeeping point that we make at the beginning, please switch off your cell phones.
Namaste. I bow to the divinity in everyone in this room. It's a privilege for people like me to have the opportunity, not simply being in the front, but simply the opportunity of being present in this spiritual place, in the presence of such thought-provoking, eminent scholars and thinkers. And this is the fifth of the sixth such annual event, and it's very humbling for people like me to be present here. And as Dr. Kamanmurthy and Swamiji have said, the main purpose of this session, the main benefits of the rest of the day, would be the interaction between all of us. And one thing that Dr. Kamanmurthy said at the end, which I'd like to add one phrase, and the questions that need to be addressed. There's a blessing that I've always cherished that my preceptor gave to me and to us from the Himalayan tradition. May your questions be resolved, even as they arise, because in the Eastern-Western blend of philosophical speculation, as a story, anecdotal speculation, at the end of the 6 days of creation coming to be ready to take form, ultimate reality reflected and sort of way to hide, way to conceal, way to place the meaning of human life, the purpose, structure of all that he had created the previous 6 days. It couldn't be left to the highest mountains, because humans would find it. It couldn't be left to the deepest depths of the oceans, or in the cosmos, because it could be traced. And finally, ultimately, he felt, with a smile behind a smile, that perhaps it should be concealed inside, where humans are not likely, or would be the last look for the place, the real purpose, meaning of life. And the vast majority of us, for millennia, from the beginning of creation, have been looking outside, and at the end of our life, we are empty-handed with the invitation to start all over again. But the wise have discovered the place where the meaning and the purpose of life is embedded. The rest of us take the invitation to repeat it over and over again. Without further ado, we have a very engaging day, and it gives me, again, as I said, the privilege to be here. And the first speaker we have, Professor John McGee, is a professor and vice dean in the Department of Classics, Faculty of Arts and Sciences at the University of Toronto. He studied at the University of California, Berkeley, and the University of Toronto, and has taught at Columbia University 1986 to 1992, and at the Pontifical Institute of Medieval Studies at the University of Toronto since 1992. He is a member of the Classics Department, the Collaborative Program in Ancient and Medieval Philosophy, and the Center of Medieval Studies, of which he is currently the director. And he is a senior fellow at the Pontifical Institute of Medieval Studies. His general research interests are in late ancient philosophy and philosophical commentators, and in textual criticism. He has published extensively on Nicias. I did try to check the spelling, the pronunciation. Manlius, Severinus Vertius in particular, and a critical edition of his this is a bit tricky one, Interpreter. I'll have to leave it to you. I did make a reference that, at least in this case, Professor McGee will not take any offense, but in Sanskritam, if the Ucharan is not correct, there is often a frown on the faces. Commentaries and an English translation of Calcitius. It gives me great pleasure to invite Professor John McGee to address us. Thank you.
Give you to Summit on that side.
Can you hear me? Thank you very, very much for the invitation. It's an honor. It's a great pleasure. It's also an honor to work with Kumar at the University of Toronto. We have some, what I call, quality time together. We have some time which I would not describe as quality time. We work very well together, even under the worst of circumstances when those crop up. Kumar, thank you for the invitation. It is indeed an honor. When I saw the series of questions that were sent around to us, my first thought was, oh no, Professor Murthy is out to destroy my grade point average once again. He's giving us final examination questions for which I have no hope of ever answering. It reminded me of St. Augustine in the Confessions in the 10th book when he's speculating on the nature of time and the origin of creation. And somebody asked him, I think I've caught you. And what was God doing before he created time? To which Augustine responded, well, I won't use the answer that some use, namely he was creating hell for people who ask questions like that. And I won't go in the direction of Monty Python, one of my favorite movies, The Meaning of Life. Whether life means bugger all down here on earth, the funny song, and yet all these things are somehow relevant. So my first thought was, I'm going to try to trick Professor Murthy. I'm going to disambiguate the questions, thinking myself very clever, because I was taught you don't answer a question until you know the meaning of the question. Alas, Kumar has already disambiguated the questions for us, so that, in a sense, takes some of my thunder. But you have a copy of what was sent to us. And as you'll see, it was broken down into 5 questions, which to me break down into 3 questions, 2 of which have sub-questions. And as I tried to get my mind around this set of issues, it's perhaps fortunate that I'm going first in a sense, because I have nothing to offer but thoughts on the questions. I have no answers. And indeed I have what I think is a broader question that stands above these, because I have also the feeling that Professor Murthy has stacked the deck against us in slanting the investigation in one direction, which I think might be reversed. Why should we not be Epicureans? Now, number 1, does the world we live in have a purpose or meaning? 2, A, is the structure and order that is observed in nature an accident? 2B, or is the structure and order that we perceive an illusion? Now you might wonder, how can you perceive an illusion? But let's leave that for a moment. 3, part A, what about life? Does it have purpose, structure, and meaning? 3B, if it does, what are the consequences for our spiritual life and for our social and interpersonal behavior? Now, my reaction to this is that we can isolate the terms that are the most loaded and the most difficult to deal with, and break them down into 2 basic categories. One I will put under a heading which I will call macrocosm, for lack of a better descriptor, and the others will go under a heading which I will call microcosm, and then I have 2 that stand between them. Under macrocosm, first of all, comes the word world. But there's the further qualification, the world we live in. How many worlds are there? Do we live only on this earth? Or do we regard our world as, say, the solar system, and yet we don't live on Mars? So what does it actually mean to say the world we live in? And as a close equivalent to world is the term nature, and yet we know they're not identical. Second, and alongside these in the same category of macrocosm, looking at the larger structure of things, there is the word purpose, questions 1 and 3A. There is the word meaning, 1 and 3A. There's the word structure, which I take as a close synonym of order, and I take the 2 together as being antonyms, in some sense, of the word accident, which comes in question 2A. Now, on the microcosm side, I put the word life, with the further qualification that it is not restricted to biological life, but includes something we call spiritual life. Consequences, because it's evident already, just from the way the questions are phrased, that whoever gave us those questions, Professor Murthy, was already thinking that there must be an intelligibility to the universe, and from that we should be able to deduce, in some kind of cause and effect pattern, the meaning, and I've already given away my direction here, for us. Consequences, behavior, further qualified social behavior, and here now I move the word meaning. It seems to me misplaced when it's set alongside order and structure. It may be worth pointing out that in Greek and Latin the terms for the world are, this is a sort of a gee whiz observation, in Greek, cosmos, from which we get cosmetics. It's a prettification, an order from its lipstick, its makeup, but it's also order. It came to mean cosmos in the sense that we think of it, and we get the higher orders, ranges of meaning, cosmology, so on and so forth. and in Latin, mundus, but, which means fundamentally clean. But we also associate it with words like mundane, and not easily associated with the broader metaphysical, cosmological sort of speculation. So how is it that these words cover those ranges of meaning, and yet we use them in both ways without maybe really reflecting on them? Two further points. When we get to questions, what I call 2A and B, what we're doing is pitting observation and perception against illusion vis-a-vis what is taken for granted as a structure or order. So the question here for me is this not begging the question? Is it not, in fact, assuming the very thing that needed to be proved? In other words, why shouldn't we just ask whether there is an order, and then once we get somewhere with that question, try to sort out whether or not it's perceptible, whatever it is, or illusory. That Professor Murthy is aware of this is clear from his opening remarks, so in a sense I'm going over the same territory. If, on the other hand, it comes down to illusion, we have to ask maybe what's the difference between what we're engaging in pure solipsism? Are we all just in private universes of our mind? And there's no particular meaning to any of it, beyond what would be the terms for proof that, in fact, there's an objective reality that we're all participating in at this moment, for example. 2A and 3B are both subject to the further questioning, are these one or two questions in each case? I would want clarity on that before I could begin to try to get my mind around them. Now, a moment of history before I come to, because I want to keep to time. The most powerful minds of Greco-Roman antiquity in this altogether are four, in my opinion, and they have direct relevance to the themes here. Everyone thought about these questions in some way. They are, and the schools, the Academy, Plato, the Lyceum, or the Peripatos, and that would be Aristotle, student of Plato for 18 years, but radically different in some ways from him. Thirdly, the Garden, Epicurus. Fourthly, the Stoa, or porch, as it means, because the school was on a porticus, Chrysippus. Basically, we're looking at the years 400 BC to 200 BC. And the questions range widely, and the answers that they devised for them. But if we try to distill them to the question of the world, broadly speaking, and the consequences for our life, I think this would not do violence to their basic positions. Number one, Plato, the world has a beginning, but it will have no end. It is providentially constructed and can be understood fundamentally as a problem of mathematics. What Professor Murthy referred to as the predictable order of the world and the structure can be reduced to mathematical analysis that will, in fact, connect the movement of the planets, even the planets, with, say, harmonic theory. And it's actually a very sophisticated way of looking at things. The interesting point for me is the had a beginning but no end. Once the world is up and running, it will never end. But for Plato, the beginning is a perplexing question because he was not naive and he didn't pretend that God said and things came into existence, as in the book of Genesis. But he adduced a kind of myth according to which reason, in the form of a god, came and took recalcitrant and chaotic matter in hand, and from that constructed the world we know according to the mathematical models, beginning with the heavens and then working down to the sublunary sphere, and then creating everything that inhabits the world we live in, to echo Professor Murthy. His student Aristotle, on the other hand, who was smart as all get out, and was with him for 18 years and must have challenged him constantly. You can't understand Aristotle if you don't understand Plato, but understanding Plato is not sufficient, conversely, for understanding Aristotle, because Aristotle saw the world as eternal. It had no beginning, it had no end. It's idle to speculate about the question. He doesn't see any answer to it, or any hope of our getting to an answer. Hence, leave it alone. It's one world, though. He assumes that, and that's relevant, as you'll see in a moment. It has no superstructure or design, but it does have causes and a teleology at the level of our existence here. There are four causes in particular. And Aristotle, by contrast with his teacher Plato, sees the world as in a fundamentally biological way. Everything in this world is trying to achieve a particular perfection according to its innate form. Mathematics, biology, 3. Epicurus reacted to both and set up camp right outside the walls of the academy as though to lay siege to the academy, and harkened back to the atomists and conceived, like Aristotle, of the world as being eternal, no beginning or end, but did not conceive of it as being one. Indeed, these atoms that fly through the universe endlessly in a straight line at light speed and are immutable and eternal, each one with its particular shape, and there's a limited number of shapes with hooks that will cause them to catch up with one another and form molecular compounds, and then those perform biological things and everything else in the world. Understood that the problem with the atomic theory was that if everything is traveling in straight parallel lines, they will never clash with one another and form the first compounds, and so had to posit a swerve, a clinomen. This is a mere hypothesis to explain the phenomena, namely we need to assume an unexplained swerve to explain the first billiard ball reaction and the first molecular compound. Some have said, I don't know whether it's correct or not, but it does make some sense that the reason Epicurus did this was he was resisting this higher metaphysical kind of impulse in Greek thought and wanted in particular to preserve free will. And in order to do that, he had to think from the ethics back up to the cosmology and the metaphysics, insofar as he had any at all. Namely, what has to be preserved above all is the possibility of chance, and that there is no particular design, no particular God designing and running things, because we have this free will, and an overdetermined universe robs us of it. Fourthly, reaction to Epicurus now, the Stoics. Rigorous beyond all get out. They saw the asymmetry of positing a world, as Plato did, that had a beginning but no end. They saw the kind of vagueness of a world that was just eternal, no beginning or end. And they went the other way. The world has a beginning, Plato. It's impossible that the world, given that it is run by reason and a structure that we can understand, it's intelligible, it's pure intelligence at some level, could have no end. This would be asymmetrical. Hence they posited an end to the world as well as a beginning, which entailed a periodic conflagration, according to which the world would go up in flames, and then everything will start all over again. And you can see this is a highly determined, fatalistic view of the universe. We will all be in this room again when the world reconstructs itself, and the inevitability of reason determines that we should all be here doing exactly what we're doing right now. It'll happen at some point. We won't remember it. So, over and above all these questions that the impossible Professor Morty has posed for us to answer in 20 minutes, is the question of, I think, consequences versus antecedents. In other words, you could say, do our ethics follow from our metaphysics and cosmology, or is it the other way around? Does our cosmology and do our ethics and our metaphysics follow from our ethics? Be careful what you pray for. It might be another way of stating this. I'm going to read you a passage from a writer of the 6th century AD, and I'll finish with this, which I think poses the dilemma beautifully. Hence, this writer says, all that is subordinate to fate is likewise subject to providence, to which fate itself is subject. But there are some things under the aegis of providence which transcend the chain of fate. Such things are planted immovably close to the supreme Godhead, so that they lie outside the regime of changeability managed by fate. Imagine, he goes on to say, a series of concentric circles revolving around the same axis. The innermost one lies closest to the single nature of the central point, and itself acts as a sort of axis around which the other circles lying outside it can turn. The outermost circle, on the other hand, travels round in a wider orbit, and the further it departs from the individual middle point, the undivided middle point is a better translation, I think, the further it travels from that, the more widespread is the area over which it extends. Should anything ally and attach itself to the midpoint, it is absorbed into its undivided nature, and it ceases to separate and to spread in all directions. Similarly, conversely, I would say, whatever distances itself further from the highest mind becomes enmeshed in the broader chains of fate. Whereas the closer to the axis of the world, which a thing approaches, the freer it becomes from the control of fate. If in fact a thing clings fast to the unchanging nature of the divine mind, it becomes motionless, and it also passes beyond the necessity imposed by fate. As the power of reasoning relates to the intellect, as becoming is to being, as time is to eternity, as a circle is to its midpoint, so is the shifting chain of fate related to the unchanging oneness of providence. Now here comes the problem. Be careful what you pray for. This chain of fate moves the heavens and the stars, intermingles the elements and transforms them by their interchange. It also renews all things which come into existence and die by the generation of life, by the generation of life, offspring, and seeds. Further, this is our problem, it constrains the actions and fortunes of men by an unbreakable interlinking of causes, and since this interlinking takes its origin from unchanging providence, the causes themselves must likewise be unchangeable. For the best possible ordering of the world exists only if the undivided nature, etc., etc., etc. You see the point. These higher order metaphysics have run or pose the risk of our painting ourselves into a corner, with the result that we might not have any self-determination or freedom. I leave you with that question.
May I request that in a place of worship, we refrain from clapping until the end. And as Professor Murthy has said, to show respect to our speakers, we should engage in discussions on what we've heard from them. Thank you, John. It takes an extraordinary gift, as John has shown, to condense in 10 minutes the encyclopedic repository of some of the most original thoughts in the history of human thought. There's an expression in the Vedic tradition, Shravan, Manan, Dhyanam, to listen, to reflect, and then to absorb. And we're grateful, John, for the great gift that you've shown to condense in 8 minutes the encyclopedic understanding repository of the most original thoughts in the history of human thought. The next speaker is a very well-known person in this house of worship. Comes from the illustrious Kumar family. I was going to ask, I forgot the name, the elder sisters, I've spent a lot of time with her, Dr. Manamurthy. But there's another commonality in today's theme, in today's presenters, mathematics. Purest form of poetry, both uncovered and conceived by human mind, mathematics. And both Professor Murthys are an embodiment of this purest form of poetry, mathematics. Professor Ramurthy, the next speaker, is currently Professor of Mathematics and Philosophy at Queen of Mathematics, Poetry, and therefore Philosophy, underlying inevitable conclusion. He's a Professor of Mathematics and Philosophy at Queen's University of Kingston, Ontario. He has written more than 200 research papers and authored more than a dozen books, including one on Indian philosophy. He has received numerous awards, including the EWR Stacey Fellowship and the Killam Fellowship. He was elected to the Royal Society of Canada and the Indian National Science Academy, and has been teaching courses in Indian philosophy at Queen's University for more than a decade. Please join me in welcoming Professor Ramurthy. While Professor Murthy is coming, just one or two reminders that if you have parked the car by any chance on the road, please avoid it being towed away. There's a school close by, the school parking lot is available, and that's perhaps during lunchtime.
Revered Swami Kripamanandaji, revered Swami Sarvapriyanandaji, and fellow students, thank you for the invitation to participate in this seminar today. Recently, there have been an inordinate number of news reports of naval accidents where warships have collided into freighters and sleeping sailors died as a result. They were often trapped in sections of the ship that were submerged in the water due to the collisions. Early investigations laid the blame on overwork and stress on the part of the sailors as the cause of the accident. But later investigations into the causes revealed that the naval team did not receive enough training. Many of these sailors did not know where they were or where they were going. When I heard this news report, its universal meaning and significance, relevance to this particular seminar, flashed in my mind. We're all sailors, sailing on the ocean of life. Our body-mind complex is our ship, our vehicle. And if we do not have proper training on how to navigate this ship through this ocean of life, we'll have serious collisions. Whether or not life is a dream seems only a question for academic debate and not of any practical value. As the Buddha would say, the house is burning, our immediate duty is to put out the fire, not inquire into what caused it. So the topic of this seminar is purpose, structure, and meaning. We're asked to discuss whether life has a purpose, structure, and meaning. Now, if we answer no, then we may as well pack up and go home. We may as well as drift through life aimlessly without any purpose or meaning, like a piece of driftwood on the turbulent ocean of life. Physical and psychological misery are a part of life. And this negative position that life has no meaning only increases that share of misery. So to solve this problem, many philosophers have proposed solutions. We've heard from the ancient Greek tradition, from our previous speaker. Some have advocated the life of a recluse, who moves away from society into solitude so as to avoid the problems of life, the frictions between individuals and the larger dilemmas of life. Referring to this solution, Vivekananda humorously wrote, "Well, the wall never feels misery, the wall never loves, the wall never is hurt, but it is the wall, after all. Surely it is better to be attached and caught than to be a wall." Now, one of the questions for this particular seminar is whether the structure and order that is observed in nature is an accident. Is the structure and order an illusion? A dominant idea of Advaita Vedanta, or the philosophy of non-dualism, which most of you are familiar with, I suppose, is that the world is Maya. Now, Maya is often been translated as illusion, but it is actually a complicated word, complicated idea. And to understand the meaning of Maya can very well be a lifelong task for the philosopher. I'll return to Maya later on. The word nature, in Kumar's questions, is a bit easier to understand. We see physical nature around us, and one of the first achievements of human civilization was that there are patterns in the workings of nature. The earliest of discoveries was the cyclic aspect of nature, the transition from day into night and night into day, the movement of seasons, the regularity of weather patterns. Now, these patterns allowed our ancestors to make preparations, whether it was for growing food or for protecting themselves from the vagaries of the elements. Such knowledge gave them control over their own lives and reduced their misery to a considerable extent. Even now, as we speak, the fury of the hurricanes that are pummeling through the Caribbean, that fury is mitigated by our foreknowledge of that fury and trajectory. But we make the fundamental mistake when we speak of nature as referring only to external nature. The internal nature of the human being is also part of our experience. and it too demonstrates patterns. The study of these patterns, the science of making careful observations of our own mental processes, is often not taught in our schools. As most of you probably know, the science of reflection is called Raj Yoga in the Indian philosophical tradition. Any science worthy of the name must be founded on careful and accurate observations. The science of the mind is no exception. In fact, the science of the mind is the science of sciences. And on this point, Swami Vivekananda wrote, the science of Raj Yoga, in the first place, proposes to give us a method, a means of observing these internal states. The instrument of observation is the mind itself. The power of attention, when properly guided and directed towards the internal world, will analyze the mind and illumine facts for us. So as I mentioned, the art and science of reflection is seldom taught in our schools. In the ancient times, this was the province of religion, but it was practiced perhaps in the true sense of the word. Over time, over centuries, religions have been confused with doctrines and dogmas, rituals, and these have hardly withstood the careful scrutiny of the rational scientific method. However, it is a fact of our immediate experience that there is a world of thought and emotion. We don't need to prove that. And within ourselves, there's this world of thought and emotion that we must deal with immediately. And this can only be dealt with by having self-knowledge. This self-knowledge can be gained through introspection. I am talking to you, but at the same time, I'm aware that I'm talking to you as a detached observer. This is the first and foremost discovery of Raj Yoga, namely that we have what we may call a lower mind of thought and emotion, which engages in the world, but then at the same time there's a higher mind that's observing this. And in our current educational system, we do not teach our students how to strengthen the higher mind. We do not educate them in how to make it a powerful tool for understanding ourselves. Because by understanding ourselves, we can better understand others. And we can also understand the world around us. The way to do this is to increase the power of reflection. So everyone is experiencing immediately their world of thought and emotion, but how to understand this world of thought and emotion. Now, experience is the great teacher of the world. We're all gathering experience every moment of our waking life. So there's no shortage of experience. Yet, few of us know how to process this experience. How do we extract from this experience the lessons for life? Now, if we take the position that there's no meaning to life, then there is nothing for us to do. And as I mentioned earlier, our life would become very much like a piece of driftwood, floating aimlessly on the ocean of life. But if we were to inquire and ask, what do I learn from this experience, even though it may be a negative experience, then we gain knowledge from of the process of our own mind and extract wisdom that will guide us through further upheavals that may come to us unasked. Genuine philosophy, or as I'd like to refer to it as, the philosophical mind, is the shock absorber we need for the journey of life. Now, returning to the concept of Maya in Advaita Vedanta that I alluded to earlier, we can now understand what is meant. We always perceive the world through the window of our past impressions and prejudices. These are called samskaras in the Sanskrit tradition. These samskaras form the lower mind. Thus, we never see the world as it is, because we're always looking at it through our lower mind, through our samskaras. Now, the only way to mitigate this effect of these past impressions is to rise to the higher mind through reflective thought. Well has it been put by a great teacher that our system of education needs to be revised as the training of the mind in the 4 R's. What are the 4 R's? Well, we often know about the 3 R's, but 4 R's. Reading, writing, arithmetic, and reflection. We have to train the child in the art of reflection and introspection. Now, this perspective makes life more palatable. In fact, life becomes an adventure, an opportunity to learn. Every problem that confronts us now becomes a great teacher in disguise. If we can learn to reflect instead of react, we can learn much. If we react emotionally, we're bound to repeat our old behavior, and the same problem will confront us again and again until perhaps we get it right. So reflection is the royal road to enlightenment, which we may take to mean a certain insightful transcendence of the turmoil of life, a celestial equanimity in the midst of chaos and turbulence. Now, traditionally, reflection being viewed as part of Raja Yoga had been packaged as part of the meditative experience. The novice may be stifled in their progress with this view. For one thing, when many see meditation in a stereotypical fashion, seated perhaps in the lotus posture, controlling the breath, closing the eyes with an attempt to silence the thought and emotions, the novice struggles with his or her own demons and often abandons the attempt in frustration after maybe a few weeks. It is instructive to recall what Vivekananda said in this regard. In his commentary in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, he wrote, "All of you observe that when you're trying to concentrate the mind, your thoughts wander. When you're trying to think of God, that is the very time these samskaras appear. At other times, they're not so active. But when you don't want them, they're sure to be there, trying their best to crowd into your mind." So, there are many ways to subdue these samskaras. In Indian philosophy, yoga is the generic name given to the method of doing this. In the Bhagavad Gita, we find each of the 18 chapters is described as a yoga, or a method of reflection, as I would like to call it. But these can all be grouped into 4 categories: the yoga of work, karma yoga, the yoga of love, bhakti yoga, the yoga of knowledge, gnana yoga, and the yoga of psychic control, raja yoga. Manifold are the ways of reflection, and countless actually are the yogas. So in summary, I would like to say that life has a purpose, structure, it has a meaning, provided we reflect on its events as they impinge upon our psyche. A new dimension is added to our life if we can learn to reflect. How to do this we can discuss further in the later discussion groups. I have given personally a lot of thought on this question, and I'm willing to share my insights with you in the discussion session. But if someone here is impatient to know, let me give you the following hint. We can actually train the mind in the art of reflection by learning how to study, how to read, how to write, how to listen, how to speak. So these are my manifold ways of yoga. It is rooted in the power of the word. Indeed, through the power of the word, we can enter through the gates of enlightenment. Thank you.
Thank you, Krishnamurti. The 2 words or 2 phrases that Krishnamurti said resonates with most of us. The lower mind plays havoc, but the layers upon layers of minds, and the highest layer being buddhi, intellect, the finest, subtlest evolute of the world of matter, prakriti. and that is the central theme in almost all the Vedic literature and other corollaries to that, to bring the faculties of the intellect buddhi, the very theme of the most sacred mantra, the Gayatri mantra, may our, not just mine, may our collectively, our buddhi intellect, and the invocation goes, be inspired in the right direction, guide in the right direction. And that does require Shravan, Manan, Dhyanam, listening, reflecting, and absorbing through the faculty of the buddhi intellect. One other announcement that it may be a bit late, but still not too late, and that is this: these booklets were given for a purpose, and there's also a correspondence between this and the donation box. It's Mamuti's annual reminder to all of us that if the pages are, all the pages that are left blank require a certain fee. It goes to the donation box. So, well, it would be nice for you to give a donation, but do it other ways, but not to leave the pages blank. So please fill them up with notes, which will be, there's a departure, I believe there's a departure this afternoon. I'm sort of giving a prelude. The afternoon session, in all likelihood, I may have to leave. The afternoon session will be my senior, my mentor, Professor Chakravarti, and sitting in the back, Chakravarti, he will be leading the session in the afternoon. So the booklets then, in the discussion period, will come in very handy if the pages are filled. So please make sure the pages are filled. You have pens and pencils and the pages are there. Blank pages will require donations. The next speaker, Professor Jel Penn, is a professor of computer sciences at the University of Toronto, but he actually began his graduate career in philosophy, mathematics, pure poetry, where he studied logic, the British analytics, and the philosophy of language, which included some study in the classical Sanskrit grammatical traditions. Professor Penn's specialization then and now is in the area of mathematical linguistics, which deals with the application of mathematical methods to the study of the structure of language and speech. Professor Jel Penn. We are 6 minutes short of, not short, we have enough time.
When I was an undergraduate, I studied at the University of Chicago, and just down the street from where I lived was the Vedanta Society of Chicago. It was a really interesting place. There was a lot of history in that particular Vedanta Society because of Swami Vivekanandaji's visit to Chicago in 1893. And when I was a student, I was fortunate enough to be able to attend the World Parliament of Religion's reunion in 1993, where many Swamijis from the Ramakrishna Math and other sincere seekers from India and North America came to attend and share their inspiration, and it had a profound effect on me as a young man. And so it's really a very humbling privilege for me to be able to come here and address the learned Swamijis and also the sincere sadhaks from this lineage. I owe you an enormous debt of gratitude. When I was in university, my classmates and I used to spend a lot of time deliberating over the question, what will I do with my life? That's how we would have phrased it. So I think some of us probably meant, how will I sustain myself financially? Some of us might have meant, how can I have as much fun as humanly possible while I'm still young? But those among us who were more sincere, I think, were really asking a deeper question. What is the purpose of life? Or at least, what is the purpose of our own lives? And looking back on it, I should feel very grateful, I think, because I have known since I was about 8 years old that what I wanted to do in this life was be a professor studying mathematics and language. It's the only thing that I ever really had any inclination to do. It's the only thing maybe I was ever really good at. So it's a good thing that it all worked out in the end. And when I look now as a professor at the students that I teach who are around that age, I don't see them asking, what shall I do with my life? At least not with the same numeracy, not in quite the same way. Instead, what I hear many of them asking is, what shall I be? And not what shall I be in the Vedantic sense of who am I, in which we try to rise above body and mental identifications in order to experience some kind of transcendental self. But instead, what kind of word can I write on a label and then stick that label to my forehead? Right? And then that's who I am. And it makes me a little sad to see that. In part because the sheer size of the lexicon that I can use to write on that label is unfathomable to a young person's mind. It seems too hard of a question in some sense. We live in a society today in Canada that grants an unprecedented amount of freedom in defining who we are. And not only that, but with it comes an enormous sense of entitlement that once the label is there, other people must acknowledge it. That's a very tall order, because in the midst of that kind of existential crisis, perhaps we're not focusing as much as we could on what it is we're going to do in this life, regardless of who we say we are. I see lots of young people struggling with that right now. To me, personally, I have always viewed purpose in life more from the standpoint of duty rather than rights or freedom to choose from a menu of options. And that duty isn't the kind of duty where, my parents made me do this or something like that. It's a sort of duty that you feel within your own heart. A duty that will not allow you to sit by and not do something. That's when you know that it's your purpose. And that sense of duty is maybe something that isn't so fashionable now. We instead think of it in terms of rights. But the danger, the scary part, I guess you could say, about looking at the world in terms of duty is, what if I never feel that vocation in the original Latin sense of the word, that calling in which some path in life chooses me? And I think at this point we can take some consolation, believe it or not, in the philosophy of language, the kind of books that I enjoy reading. Because within the philosophy of language, 1,500 or 2,500 years ago, what we read in books such as those by Bhartrhari or Patanjali are statements like the following. When we enumerate the basic syllables of a language, the basic sounds of speech, in effect, what we are enumerating is all of language. Because blossomed and fruitful, they are arranged against the canvas of physical space like the moon and the stars. And having beheld them, we see in their configuration the likeness of God. That's from the Mahapashya by Patanjali. So that requires maybe a little bit of unpacking for a modern audience. The vehicle of this metaphor are the constellations in the sky. And the starring role, if you'll excuse the pun, played by the phonemes, the basic sounds of speech, are those celestial objects which are just sitting up there in a particular pattern, in particular configurations. And then we look at those and mentally interpret them as constellations, as Orion, the hunter with his shoulders and his belt, as the Big Dipper, as a big bear and a little bear. So, in some sense, it's a mental creation. Nevertheless, the stars are really there. You can measure them. They're out there. And then somehow this apparatus of interpretation is hung on those stars. And what Patanjali was telling us is that language works in the same way. The sounds of speech really are there. They're sound waves. You can measure them with a microphone. We do this in my lab all the time. And yet there's something about our minds that compels us to assign interpretations to these acoustic waves. And this kind of conventional interpretation is what we call language. Our minds find patterns and meanings. It's what we do. That's how the mental mechanism works. And the amazing thing about that delusion, if in fact none of this is real, is that you see it too. I can talk about Orion. I can talk about the bears in the sky, and you know what I mean, because it is a shared cultural delusion, if in fact that's what it is. And when I speak to you, hopefully, you understand me, because that too is a shared convention. Heraclitus the Obscure, as Professor McGee can confirm, said that words they exist in order to be shared, and yet we treat them as though they are private possessions. That's not what language is for. And you can see this even in other works by Patanjali, in the Patanjali Yoga Sutra, which we've already heard about from the second speaker. In chapter 3, in Sutra 17, it talks about Shabda, Artha, and Pratyaya. Sound, meaning, and then a kind of associated mentation or mental impression that goes along with that. And Swami Vivekananda says in his commentary that we're not just talking about language here. Shabda isn't just the phonemes, it's the external cause. And Artha just isn't meaning, it's an internal vibration that's sent by the indriyas, the senses, into the mind where it creates a certain impression. And the pratyaya isn't just associated conventional linguistic concepts, it's the reaction of the mind to that. And Swami Vivekananda goes on to elaborate that to some extent, the yogi's job is to slow down, not break, but slow down that mechanism, to be able to see that actually those three things are not the same. They're superimposed upon each other. So look, again with reference to the Yoga Sutra in chapter 1, Sutra 42. There's a kind of lower samadhi called Vitarka, Savatarka samadhi. This is the samadhi that comes with a questioning, with logic. Tarka means something like logic, in which we have these three quantities, Shabda, Artha, and Jnana, again superimposed with each other. To get the higher states of samadhi, we somehow have to leave that behind. And fast forwarding 2,000 years or so to Western Europe, Ferdinand de Saussure tells us that language is a convention. That doesn't mean that language is an accident, as the question we were asked to respond to says. It's a convention. It has an order to it. that we rely on in order to share ideas. But it isn't just language, I think, that has that sort of conventional order. This is called the Vyavaharika Satya in Vedanta philosophy. It's a conventional reality. It isn't the ultimate reality, but it has a predictability to it. And this is just part of what our minds seek to do. A Hindu priest, very wise Hindu priest, once told me that the great thing about reality is that everything in it is real. And that includes our minds. This capacity, this tendency that we have towards finding meaning, to see simplicity in things that might otherwise be complex, is just a part of the human experience. It's something that we share with each other, and it's something that we cannot help but do. And yet, for our spiritual progress, it's something that we must be a witness to. So, that's my attempt to address these questions in brief. And thank you again very much for this opportunity.
Instead of 20 minutes per speaker, I wish we had 20 days of being in the presence. Even that would be short. Professor Penn, there was, while listening to you, the very first few sentences you said made my hair stand on my arm. As perhaps you may be aware, the 7th Parliament of the World's Religions is going to be held in Toronto. People from 20 countries rooted for that. Some of us have been working for Kumar-Murthy's on the steering committee, and there were 45 chiefs, chairs, co-chairs. He and I, the only 2 Indians on this. But we wish that you join us as we move forward in showcasing Toronto and indeed Canada as a beacon of social liberalism in a highly pluralistic society. Thank you. There's several points that it would be our collective, it behooves us in the session that will follow afterwards for each and every one of us, or as many of us as possible, to express our own appreciation of what has been said so far by asking questions, reflecting, and transmitting what little we have absorbed in this last short period of time. The next speaker, there is always a sort of shyness on the part of people like me when we introduce senior monks from within the Vedanta Society. They require no introductions. The legacy of Swami Vivekananda, who is also going to be a central theme, behind the scenes if you wish, in the 7th Parliament of the World's Religions, unspoken of, without in-your-face kind of thing, but attempt to showcase is Gandhiji's 150th anniversary 2019, which is also going to be celebrated, brought into the theme. But the legacy of Swami Vivekananda that drew home, being the Vedanta Society, the Ramakrishna Order, that goes beyond anything that could be expressed by speech in terms of recognition, not recognition, a sense of gratitude to the senior monks within the Vedanta Society, Swami Kripavanandaji, Swami Sarvapriyanandaji, and all the senior monks from the Vedanta Society, the rest of us, people like me in the diaper stage of our understanding of the spiritual traditions, owe a sense of gratitude for the continuation. These are the nurturers of the original thoughts enunciated by sages and prophets and seers. Here's the nurturers. Swami Sarvapriyanandaji is presently the minister and spiritual leader of the Vedanta Society in New York. Prior to taking his assignment, or this assignment, he served as assistant minister of the Vedanta Society of Southern California, Hollywood, for 13 months. Swamiji joined the Ramakrishna Order in 1994 and received sannyasa in 2004 before being posted to the VSSC's Hollywood Temple Swamiji served as an Acharya teacher of the monastic probationers training center at the headquarters of the order. He has served the Ramakrishna Math and Mission in various capacities, including being the vice principal of the Devghar Vidyapith Higher Secondary School, principal of the Shikshana Mandira Teachers Education College at Belur Math, and the first registrar of the Vivekananda University of India, and all this in the very young period that we have Swami Subramanianji in our midst. That's it.
Thank you very much. With that introduction, even I want to hear the speaker. But I can only disappoint now. Very difficult questions, most profound questions of life that have been set for discussion. But I was so happy to see the subject of this seminar. Why are these questions difficult? One reason for that, I'll go to St. Augustine, as Professor Maggie started with St. Augustine, a quote from St. Augustine. This is actually something that I came across not reading St. Augustine directly, but Wittgenstein. He starts a discussion of language by this quote from St. Augustine, where St. Augustine is asked, he says, about time. He says, if you ask me about time, I do not know what it is. If you don't ask me, I know what it is. Right? So these are the most fundamental concepts of life. Time, space, matter, purpose of life, God, the ultimate building blocks of life. And these questions are difficult. One reason is, Wittgenstein said, because these are the fundamental building blocks of our concepts. So the higher order concepts can be explained in terms of the fundamental concepts. But if you ask questions about the fundamental concepts, with what shall we explain those concepts? That's a problem. My talk now, in the time that I have, is that when I pose these questions to Indian philosophy, let's see what kind of answers we get from Indian philosophy. I will divide this talk into three parts. Three broad strands of Indian philosophy. We will ask these questions: structure, purpose, and meaning, and then see what kind of answers we get. The three strands are, in the order in which I will speak about, the Nyaya Vaisheshika school of thought, one. Then we will go on to the Sankhya Yoga school of thought, two. I'm clubbing them together because they are sister philosophies. And then finally to Vedanta, three. The same questions, and let's see how we discover what I might think are deeper and deeper answers. First, the Nyaya Vaisheshika school. They are realists, they are pluralists. So here is the answer. Here's the story of the universe according to a dualistic Nyaya Vaisheshika approach. Structure of the universe. According to the Vaisheshika philosophers, the universe has a very definite structure. There are 7 categories by which we can understand this universe. There are substances, things. So what we see around in this room are things, substances. In Sanskrit, dravya. They may be as solid and gross as this table or as this room, or they may be a little more subtle like our minds, or they may be even more subtle like the soul itself. They are all things, substances, dravya. And these things have qualities, guna. So this table, for example, is a substance and it has the quality of being brown. And there are actions. So here's this body which is a substance and it's speaking. So there's an action going on. This action is called karma or kriya. And there are relations. Among them, there is a relation called inherence, samavaya. There is particularity or technicalities. There are particularities which make certain objects special. So it's called vishesha. And finally, even absence of things is considered a reality. Abhava, the absence. I'm reminded of Professor Larson, who is a philosopher who specializes in the Sankhya philosophy. When he went to India, the Institute of Culture in Kolkata, and Swami Lokeshwarananda had just passed on. And Professor Larson, who really loved Swami Lokeshwarananda, he used this concept of absence to talk about Swami Lokeshwarananda. He said, today we are acutely conscious of the presence of the absence of Swami Lokeshwarananda. So, even absence can be a presence. So, that's called abhava. The seven categories, and this covers the whole structure of reality according to these Vaisheshika philosophers. Nyaya is also very similar. And the purpose, I was so taken by Professor Maggie's description of the universe according to the Epicureans, the atoms all rushing on in space with great speed. According to the Nyaya Vaisheshika school, what exists is space and free-floating atoms. In fact, in Indian tradition, the Vaisheshikas were the first to talk about the atomic structure of matter. The names they used, Anu, for example, is still the name for atoms in all Indian languages today. So there are atoms floating in space and moving at great speed through space. And then what happens? God, Ishvara. It is by God's design, instead of the swerve, which the Stoics, the Epicureans speak about, it's by God's design that the atoms come together into configurations, planets and stars and human beings and other living creatures. And what guides God in making these configurations? It is the past karma of all the souls in this universe. The souls are eternally coexistent with God. God exists and the souls, the Atman, the self, all of us, we exist as selves, and our past karma guides God in making this universe, the particular design of this universe. So you have a designer who is designing the universe for us. You may think that I didn't order this particular universe, where's my order? I didn't fill up a form. But we did actually, because of our past karma. So we sort of made this universe, or at least gave the order for this universe based on our past karma, and God makes this universe for us. For what purpose? The purpose is liberation. We finally attain to moksha, or liberation. So God designs a universe based on our karma. The whole universe has a structure based on cause and effect, that's the law of karma, and there's a whole purpose to it that is giving liberation to the individual beings like us. That's the meaning of life. So this is a story. And you know, if you look at it, if you reflect upon it, you will see this is the story in most religions. There is a creator God, and God loves us all and has given us this life, and there is a purpose and meaning, ultimate goal to this whole existence. There are problems with this, I'm sure we'll talk about it. You know, when I first heard about this seminar, and I looked at some of the people present in the speakers, mathematicians and computer scientists, I thought this was going to be one of those Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens kind of fight between but they're all very, very nice. They've been very sweet about it. There are problems with this story, and you just have to listen to Dawkins or Hitchens or Sam Harris or Daniel Dennett to know the problems with this story, especially when it comes into a clash with the story that we get from modern science. This God you talk about, what proof? You see, in all the dualistic religions, starting with the 5 proofs of the existence of God, which St. Thomas Aquinas talks about, to Udayanacharya, the great Nayayika logician in India 1,000 years ago, in his classic text Nyaya Kusumanjali, where he offers 10 proofs of the existence of God directed against the Buddhist who's trying to prove that there is no such thing as a God. So there is a great need to prove the existence of God when you have such a story. Not only that, God becomes a big question mark. Not only that, even this design that you talk about, modern science will say that we can explain all that with evolution. Evolution can account for design. Why do you need a creator, an intelligent creator, to explain design in this universe? So if you look at, for example, the human hand, it has a structure. You can see it has a clear structure. It also has a purpose. It can do this. It can grasp. And you may think it has a meaning for us because it helps us in life. And is this an argument for the existence of an intelligent designer? Well, Richard Dawkins will tell you, Darwin will tell you, that I can explain this with the help of evolution. Why explain something by bringing God or intelligent designer? So this is one approach. The next approach I'll go to is the Sankhya Yoga approach. Here, the structure is not 7 categories, but 2 categories. Consciousness, that's you or me, and nature, Purusha and Prakriti. The whole universe is explained as a play between consciousness and nature, Purusha and Prakriti. Whatever we see out here, this entire universe, from galaxies to quarks, from mountains to dolphins, all of this is a product of nature, Prakriti. And here, there are indications in the Patanjali Yoga Sutra of a kind of proto-understanding of evolution, that nature evolves into all of this. And so, from a Sankhya Yoga point of view, there is no need to posit an intelligent designer. In fact, a modern evolutionist approach, an ancient Sankhya philosopher or a yoga philosopher would be comfortable with it, would be happy with it. Yes, that's it. We have no problems with that. Monier Williams, who made the first English to Sanskrit to English dictionary. He says, these ancient Hindus were Darwinists 1,000 years before Darwin. So, Prakriti evolves into this universe. But notice that consciousness has been kept out of this story. Consciousness is an independent reality apart from nature. And the idea in Sankhya is all the activities in nature are meant for consciousness. There is a principle they use in Sankhya, Sanghata Pararthatvat, which means all collectives, all compounded entities are meant for something outside that compounded entity. That sounds complicated, but it's as simple as this. The example they give is very nice, cute actually. The bed that you go to sleep in at night, you have a mattress and you have bed sheets and pillows and a comforter. Now, this compound, the elements in that, they are not meant for each other. The pillows are not there for the mattress is not there for the comforter. Rather, all of them are there for you, who's going to sleep on that bed, and you are not a part of that bed. You are something outside that bed. The bed is meant for you. So this whole universe created by nature, the claim is, it's meant for the purposes of consciousness. Purpose, meaning lies in consciousness, and nature acts for that purpose. You may say that, alright, the bed is a man-made thing. You make it for yourself, and hence it applies there that this whole thing is meant for you. But how do you know that this physical universe out there is meant for something outside of itself? So that remains a question. Bhoga and Apavarga, the entire universe is meant to give experience to these conscious souls and ultimately give freedom to these conscious souls. Bhoga means experience. It could be pleasure, it could be pain. Pleasure and pain are given to us by this universe, and ultimately when we want liberation from this cycle of pleasure and pain, birth and rebirth, then this very universe arranges things so that you find spirituality, a teacher and a practice, and finally you realize that you are not part of it, you are different from it. Bodies and minds are all products of this nature. So Prakriti and Purusha. Notice how a lot of the problems that may come from a dualistic, conventionally religious worldview, which I spoke about in the first part of this presentation, many of those problems are taken care of when you accept nature as an autonomous, not totally independent, but autonomous reality. A question here might be, it still does not gel with the scientific worldview because you are extracting consciousness from nature. Whereas the scientific worldview is that matter and space and time and energy are the fundamentals, and out of that comes this physical universe, and in this physical universe somehow life evolves and intelligence evolves, and intelligence has got purpose and meaning. Consciousness is an evolution of matter and energy in time and space. So meaning, consciousness, these are higher order things which depend on the lower order matter and energy for their existence. They are not separate. You cannot have consciousness apart from matter and energy. That would be the objection here. But here I have just mentioned, because we don't have too much time. Right now there is a lot of discussion in consciousness studies, and the really, really important question is what is called the hard problem of consciousness. There's an Australian philosopher, David Chalmers, who coined the term the hard problem of consciousness. The hard problem of consciousness is how a physical system, like the body, can generate a subjective experience of consciousness. The first person experience of seeing, hearing, smelling, touching, what you are doing right now. How can that be generated by what is clearly an objective universe, a body or a mind or a brain? And there seems to be no way of explaining it. I saw this cartoon of a person, of a scientist and his guide, and the student is deriving something on a blackboard. Stage 1, 2, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. Step 1, 2, 3 are full of mathematical symbols and equations. Step 5 is full of mathematical symbols and equations. Step 4 just says miracle. So 1, 2, 3, well understood. 5, we have got something to say about it. The connection is a miracle. As one neuroscientist put it, we understand water, we understand wine, but water to wine, how it happened in between, there is a miracle. We understand the physical system, and consciousness in one sense we understand it because we are conscious. But how does this thing happen? Really, even now we do not have an understanding. David Chalmers says we require a paradigm shift. This is why I am saying all this. David Chalmers says we may have to finally accept that consciousness is a fundamental reality as much as time and space, matter and energy are fundamental realities. He is not a Vedantist, he is not a Sankhya philosopher, not at all. He calls himself an atheist, and he is moving entirely on logic and experience. Recently I attended a debate between David Chalmers and Christoph Koch, who is the chief scientist of the Paul Allen Brain Institute in Brooklyn. So Christoph Koch took this side that consciousness can be reduced, a kind of materialist reductionist approach, can be reduced to brain states. Whereas David Chalmers said, no, it cannot be reduced. And it's very interesting that this is at the cutting edge of scientific debate. You have somebody seriously proposing that consciousness is not generated by matter, which is fundamental. If that is so, you are almost virtually at the doorsteps of Sankhya. Consciousness is a fundamental reality, and time, space, matter, energy, nature is a fundamental reality, and they interact. Let me move on to Vedanta and conclude there. The third part of this presentation. When we come to Advaita Vedanta, the picture changes again. According to Advaita Vedanta, the crucial formula to hold on to in Advaita Vedanta is that thou art, tat tvam asi. The structure of our experience is subject and object. You are there and you are experiencing this world. That's the structure according to Advaita Vedanta. And the crucial understanding of Advaita Vedanta is the reality of you, the subject, and the reality of this entire objective universe is one and the same reality. As a Sufi mystic said, when I searched for God, I found myself. When I searched for myself, I found God. Tat Tvam Asi means that the fundamental reality of the universe and the fundamental reality about yourself are one and the same. This is something that you find in some of the mystics of different religions. Meister Eckhart, the Christian mystic in medieval Germany, he says the ground of your own being and the ground of God, the reality of God and the reality of your own being are one and the same reality. So this is the understanding of Advaita Vedanta. What does it do? You see, I'll leave you with this thought. My whole take on this debate between the modern atheists, Hitchens and company, and religion, conventional religion, is that science seems to have truth on its side. It's dealing with reality. That's why even people in religion have to sometimes claim this is very scientific, which is what they mean by that. What they mean is this is real, this is true. You never hear a scientist, you never hear Stephen Hawking say this is very Christian. That therefore that my theories about black holes are right because it's very Christian or it's very Hindu. No, it's very scientific. That's why I am right. So science seems to be dealing with reality, with truth. But the problem with that is somehow meaning seems to be left out. There are some of the more nicer faces of the atheists now. Sean Carroll, for example, I met him in Hollywood. He is from Caltech. He's written this book, The Big Picture, where he tries to explain everything. He puts meaning also as part of it. But still, meaning is an evolute. It's not fundamental. So religion seems to have meaning and purpose on its side. We find deep meaning in religion. But the truth of religion, if true, the truth of religion seems to be shaking under the attacks of modern science. For me, what Advaita does is, it combines the reality which you find in science and the meaning which you find in religion and fuses them and shows that they are identical. They are reconciled or they are identical in Brahman. Your own existence is indubitable. You clearly feel your own existence. But it's a limited existence because we suffer and we die. Whereas the existence of God is unlimited, infinite. But the only problem is, whether does God exist or not? So these are the two approaches. Now what Advaita Vedanta says is, the two are one reality. The certainty about your own existence is combined with the infinitude of God's existence. So a certain infinitude, Wittgenstein again to quote him, he says, religion is basically a search for the ultimate security, for perfect security. The certainty. The certainty of your own existence and the infinitude of God's existence is combined together in this formula, that thou art. We can discuss this later. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Swamiji. Swamiji, among many nuggets, one, and I'm perhaps crossing my line, is that at our stage, many in this room may have already been exposed to it, but the Mandukya Upanishad, consciousness, that 16 verses, going back to millennia, attempts to explain it all. Nanta prajam, Vash prajam, Avita prajam, Prajan, Kanana prajam, Aprajam, adrashtam avibhyaharam abraham. Lakshman goes on very brief. It is not an ordinary consciousness, it is not the sum total of consciousnesses, it is not waking state, dream state, even the state of sushupti. It is not something that can be defined, explained, understood, even understood by the mind. It is that by which the mind understands in the first place. So those of us who may not have had the opportunity, and even those of us who may have gone through the Mandukya Upanishad and the Karika passages, that critiques on, not critiques, the commentaries on that, it behooves us. I'd also like to take the opportunity of the Parliament of World Religions, because it is the house of Swami Vivekananda, and we will be, among many other things, behooves us also to register. There's a slight digression in the sense that we Canadians often take a back seat to our US counterparts, and the registration fee is in US dollars, which we pay 30% more. But there is a solution to that, and that is that there is, of course, the registration is 50% off until September end. However, we have an advantage as Canadians, is that if we form a group of 10, even strangers, and that should continue to the end, we prevail on that, that would be another way of reducing our costs of attendance. Metropolitan Convention Center, and you should be aware of it, the local merchants are putting in the fee, $500,000 free of charge for us. That's local merchants down in Toronto who have given to the organization $500,000, which will be paid to the as a fee for the rental. So the Canadians, we do have an advantage of being able to, even if we miss the September deadline, but it also behooves us behind the scenes. Dr. Kumar Murthy and I were both on the board of directors to ensure that we have a presentation. We're working behind the scenes. Dr. Karan Singh to come from India to present Auroville, which is the basic foundation of Swami Vivekananda and Aurobindo, the ancient teachings. So Aurobindo's legacy and Auroville Foundation will also be presented at the Parliament. We will be breaking up for refreshments for a break until 10:25. After there will be brief discussion among ourselves. And those of us, not those of us, please be conscious of the color of the booklets we have. Is the pink. People holding the pink booklet will meet in the meditation room across this side. The green booklets or green notebooks, mezzanine upstairs. The blue will meet in the executive committee room. Oh, that's this floor?
It's inside.
In this floor. And the fourth color, which I'm afraid I'm not sure what the fourth color might be, but other than the pink, green, blue, the fourth color is
Green.
yellow.
Oh, yellow.
Yes. And they will meet in the main hall. Now I suspect that about 50, 60 of us, so that means probably 15, 20 people in each group. And one other thing is that in the group discussion, there will be a presentation afterwards. And I believe you have the program at 12:25, 1 hour after the 10-minute break. The presentation, so it behooves us in this little group of 15, 20 to form or select or nominate or draft a presenter, so to speak. Somebody take notes, another one to